I was born on the 14th day of March, 1864, in a sod house my father built with his own 2 hands. Pawnee County, Kansas. Now, I don't expect young people today to know what a sod house is, so let me tell you, it was dirt. Walls of dirt, roof of dirt, floor of dirt. When it rained hard, mud would drip from the ceiling onto whatever you were eating. My mother used to hold a tin plate over the stew pot. That's the kind of life it was. My father, Hiram Holbrook, he came back from the war in '65 with a stiff leg and not much else. He didn't talk about what happened to him in Virginia. Not ever. Not once in my whole life. But I'd see him sometimes, late at night, just sitting by the stove, staring at nothing. My mother, Temperance, everyone called her Tempy, she was 29 years old that winter I'm going to tell you about. Seemed ancient to me then. Now I'm 88 and I think, Lord, she was just a girl herself. There were 3 of us children. Orrin was the oldest, 9 years old, already working alongside my father like a grown man. Then me in the middle, 6 years old, the one nobody paid much attention to. And then there was Bertie, my baby sister. She was 3, and she was always sick with something. Weak lungs, my mother said. Every winter we'd hold our breath waiting to see if Bertie would make it through. Now, the summer of '69, the grasshoppers came. I remember standing in the doorway watching them, and the sky, it looked brown, like the air itself had turned to dirt. They ate everything: corn, wheat, the vegetable garden, even the clothes my mother had hung out to dry. By the time they moved on, there wasn't much left to harvest. My father stood in the field that evening, just stood there with his hands at his sides, and I saw my mother watching him through the window, with a look I didn't understand then. That fall, we had less than half what we needed stored for winter. I know that now. I didn't know it then. But I knew something was wrong when my father killed Bess. Bess was our milk cow, the only one we had. He killed her in October, before the first frost even came. We always waited until deep winter to slaughter, to keep the meat frozen natural. But that year, he did it early. I remember asking my mother why, and she said Daddy knows what he's doing. She was wrong about that. None of us knew what was coming. The snow started the week before Thanksgiving, and I want you to understand something about Kansas winters back then. There was nothing between us and the North Pole but a few hundred miles of open prairie. No trees to break the wind, no hills to hide behind. When that wind came down from Canada, it came straight at you like it had a personal grudge. My father used to say the cold in Kansas didn't just freeze you, it hunted you. And that winter, it found us. By December, we couldn't see the fence posts anymore. The snow had buried them completely. My father had strung a rope from the house to the barn so he wouldn't get lost walking those 40 feet. Sounds foolish, I know, but people died that way. You'd step outside in a blizzard, lose your bearings, and they'd find your body in the spring 20 yards from your own front door. The world just disappeared. Everything white, everywhere, all the time. After a while, you started to forget there had ever been colors. The food went faster than my parents expected. I didn't understand rationing then. Didn't know that's what my mother was doing when she started giving us smaller portions. First the sugar ran out, sometime around Christmas. Then the flour got low. My mother stretched it with ground-up dried corn, but even that didn't last. The meat from Bess, which should have carried us through February, was nearly gone by the middle of January. I remember my mother standing at the larder one morning, just standing there with her hand on the empty shelf, and I saw her lips moving like she was praying or counting, or maybe both. The water in the bucket by the stove would freeze solid overnight. We slept in our clothes, all 5 of us in one bed, Bertie in the middle where it was warmest. She had started coughing in early December, this wet, rattling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her little chest. My mother made poultices from what herbs she had left, but nothing seemed to help. Every night I'd lie there listening to my sister cough and feeling my stomach ache from hunger, and thinking this must be what it feels like to be trapped. My father tried to get to Fort Larned in the second week of January. It was about 40 miles east, and there was a trading post there, a man named Amos Kettering who might have supplies. He left before dawn on a Tuesday, I think it was, riding our one remaining horse. My mother stood in the doorway watching him disappear into the white until there was nothing left to see, and she didn't move from that spot for what felt like an hour. He came back 2 days later, half frozen, snow-blind, having made it maybe 15 miles before the horse couldn't go any further. He hadn't even gotten halfway. I remember he couldn't feel his feet for 3 days after that, and my mother had to rub them with snow to bring the feeling back slowly. She was afraid he'd lose his toes. He didn't, but it was close. After that, nobody talked about going for help anymore. We were on our own, and I think we all knew it, even me at 6 years old. The neighbor to our north, old Zeke Dunmore, he hadn't come by in weeks. He used to check on us every Sunday after the snow started, but then he just stopped coming. My father said he was probably just hunkered down like we were. But I saw the way my parents looked at each other when they said it, and even then, I knew they were scared of what it really meant. By the end of January, we were eating things I didn't know you could eat. My mother would go out in the brief moments between storms and strip bark from the cottonwood trees near the frozen creek. She'd boil it for hours, sometimes all day, until it turned into this gray, bitter soup that you could swallow if you tried hard enough. It didn't taste like anything, really. It didn't fill you up either. But it was something to put in your stomach, and by then, that was all that mattered. I remember sitting at that table, all of us with our tin cups of bark water, nobody saying a word. Even Orrin, who always had something to say, just sat there staring into his cup like he was trying to will it into something else. My father went to check on Zeke Dunmore on the 23rd of January. I remember the date because it was the day after my mother's birthday, and we had nothing to give her, not even a kind word, it seemed. Daddy said he was just going to walk the 2 miles north, see if old Zeke needed anything or had anything to spare. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back, his face looked like something had broken behind it. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down by the stove and put his head in his hands. My mother asked him twice what happened before he finally answered. Zeke was dead. Had been dead for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer, frozen solid in his bed with his Bible still open on his chest. My father said it looked like he just went to sleep and never woke up. After that, Daddy didn't speak for 3 days, not one word. He'd just sit by the stove, staring at the flames, and I wondered if he was seeing Zeke's face in there, or maybe seeing his own. Bertie got worse after that. The cough had turned into something deeper, something that shook her whole tiny body every time it came. She burned with fever, so hot that it hurt to touch her forehead, but she'd shiver like she was freezing. She stopped eating what little we had. My mother would try to spoon bark soup into her mouth, and it would just dribble back out. I'd watch my sister's face getting thinner every day, her eyes getting bigger in her head, and I didn't have words for what I was feeling. I still don't, really. There's no word for watching your baby sister disappear in front of you and not being able to do a single thing about it. My own stomach had stopped hurting by then. The first few weeks, the hunger was this sharp, angry thing, twisting inside me, demanding attention. But by February, it had gone quiet. Just this empty, hollow feeling, like somebody had scooped out my insides and left nothing behind. I found out later that's a bad sign, when the pain stops. Means your body's starting to give up. But at the time, I thought maybe I was getting used to it. Children think foolish things. Orrin tried to help. Every morning he'd check the rabbit snares he'd set near the creek, trudging through snow up to his waist, coming back with nothing. Day after day, empty traps. He stopped talking about it after a while, stopped saying maybe tomorrow. He'd just come in, shake the snow off his coat, and sit down without looking at anyone. He was 9 years old, trying to be the man of the house while our actual father sat silent by the fire. I think about that sometimes, what that must have done to him. He never really talked about that winter afterward, not even when we were grown. One night, I saw my mother sitting by the lamp, sewing something. A little dress, white cotton, smaller than anything Bertie could wear anymore. And I understood, even at 6 years old, what that dress was for. She was making a burial gown. She was getting ready for Bertie to die. I didn't say anything. I just lay there in the dark, pretending to be asleep, watching my mother's hands move the needle in and out, and I thought, this is the end of everything. The second night of February, 1870. That was the night I believed, truly believed, that none of us would live to see spring, that they would find us all in that sod house when the snow melted, frozen together like Zeke Dunmore, and nobody would ever know what we went through. That was the longest night of my life, and I've lived 88 years of nights since then. The morning after that longest night, my father did something I never expected. He stood up from that chair by the stove, the first time he'd really moved in days, and he started putting on his coat. My mother asked him what he was doing, and he said he was going for help. She told him he'd tried that already, that he'd nearly died, that the snow was even deeper now, and he just looked at her and said, "If I stay here and watch my children starve, I'll die anyway. At least this way I'm trying." I remember those words exactly because they're the only time I ever heard my father talk about dying. He wasn't a man who spoke of such things. He kissed my mother on the forehead. Then he went to each of us children. Orrin first, then me, then Bertie, who was too weak to even open her eyes. He pressed his lips to our foreheads one by one, and his beard was rough against my skin, and he smelled like wood smoke and something else, something sour that I now know was hunger. I asked him if he was coming back. He didn't answer. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he walked out into the white, and the door closed behind him, and that was it. We didn't know if we'd ever see him again. The first day passed, then the second. My mother tried to keep things normal, if you can call anything about that time normal. She boiled more bark, she tended to Bertie, she made Orrin and me do small chores to keep our minds busy. But I could see her going to the window every few minutes, looking out at nothing, waiting for a shape to appear in the snow that never came. By the third morning, she had stopped going to the window. I think she had started to accept that he wasn't coming back, that she was alone now with 3 children, one of them dying, and no food left at all. The bark soup had gone thin as water. There was nothing left to boil. That third morning, Bertie stopped coughing. And I know that sounds like it should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The silence was worse, so much worse. When a sick person stops coughing, stops fighting, it means something terrible. My mother sat by her little bed, holding her hand, and I could see her lips moving in prayer, and I remember thinking, God isn't listening. If he was listening, he would have sent help by now. And then, around midday, there was a knock at the door. Not my father's knock, which was 3 quick raps. This was different, slower, deliberate. My mother's face went pale. We weren't expecting anyone. No one could be out in that snow, in that cold, unless something was very wrong. She picked up my father's rifle from above the fireplace, the one he'd left behind, and she walked to the door and opened it just a crack. There was a man standing there, a Pawnee man, dressed in furs and leather, with snow in his black hair and a face I couldn't read. Behind him, he had a travois, one of those wooden sleds they used, and on that travois was a deer, a whole deer, freshly killed, still steaming in the frozen air. He didn't say anything. He didn't speak English, or if he did, he chose not to use it. He just stood there, looking at my mother, and then he untied half of that deer and laid it on our doorstep. Half a deer, enough meat to last us weeks. Then he turned around and walked back into the snow, pulling his travois behind him, and he was gone before any of us could say a word. My mother stood in that doorway for a long time. the cold pouring in, staring at that meat like she couldn't believe it was real, like it might disappear if she blinked. I watched her face go through something I didn't have names for then. Fear, confusion, disbelief, and then finally, something breaking loose inside her. She dragged that meat into the house, and she closed the door, and she leaned against it, and she cried. I had never seen my mother cry before that moment, not once in my entire life. She was the strong one, the one who held everything together, and there she was, sobbing like a child, sliding down to the floor with her hands over her face, and I didn't know what to do. Orrin and I just stood there, watching her, and after a while, she wiped her eyes with her apron, and she said, God does listen. He just sends help in ways we don't expect. She cooked that venison slow, made a broth first for Bertie because solid food would have been too much for her little stomach. I remember the smell of that meat cooking, the way it filled the whole sod house, and how we all just sat there breathing it in like it was something holy. Bertie drank that broth and she kept it down, and by the next morning her fever had broken. The coughing came back, but softer now, like her body remembered how to fight. My father came home on the 4th day, stumbling through the door with a rescue party from Fort Larned behind him. He'd made it halfway there before a patrol found him, nearly frozen in a snowdrift. When he saw us alive, saw Bertie sitting up and drinking broth, he fell to his knees right there in the doorway. I'd never seen my father on his knees before. When my mother told him about the Pawnee man, about the deer, he didn't say anything for a long while. He just sat there, shaking his head, trying to understand how a stranger had saved his family when he couldn't. That was 82 years ago now. I'm 88 years old, sitting here in this chair, and some days that winter feels closer than yesterday. We left Kansas that spring, moved to Nebraska where my mother had people. My parents are buried in Lincoln, side by side, gone 30 years now. Orrin, my brother who tried so hard to be a man at 9 years old. He died in Cuba in 1898, fighting in a war I never understood. But Bertie, my baby sister who we all thought would die that February night, she lived to be 70 years old. Had 6 children of her own. Every time I saw her, even when we were old women together, I'd think about that little white dress my mother was sewing, the one that was never used. I kept that dress my whole life. It's in a trunk in my closet right now, and I still can't look at it without crying. People ask me about the Depression sometimes, like that was the worst thing, like 1929 was when hunger was invented. I tell them, I knew hunger before your Depression, real hunger. The kind that changes what you believe is possible, what you believe about people, about God, about everything. My father spent the rest of his life trying to find that Pawnee man. Never did. We never knew his name, never knew why he helped us. I think maybe he had children too. Maybe he saw Bertie through our window and couldn't walk away. I'll never know for certain, but I still dream about that winter sometimes. I wake up cold, even in July, reaching for a blanket that isn't there. 82 years, and my body still remembers. I've had all this time to think about what that winter taught me. And what I keep coming back to is this. You never know who's going to save you. Might be the person you least expect. Might be someone you were raised to fear. And you never know who you might save either, just by showing up, just by offering what you have. That's why you keep going. That's why you don't give up, even when the pain stops and the silence comes and you think this is the end of everything. Because help might be walking towards you right now through the snow, and you just can't see it yet.